the truly unfortunate thing about this interview is that it's happening right around noon on a Monday. So it's too late for me to have coffee with Adrian, and it's too early for me to have cocktails with you.
That's true.
So we're going to
That
have a
is
bottle of
true.
water.
Yes, that's a
So
safe,
cheers. Let's have a nice little
safe,
chat.
safe drink.
Okay.
Yes.
So I'm going to have you ask me a question first.
Okay. So, Mike,
Yes.
what is NBOA? What does it stand for, and why?
Okay. NBOA is the Neighborhood Building Owners Alliance, and the organization was created about 18 or 19 years ago when there were about 5 or 6 organically sprouted neighborhood organizations. Rogers Park Builders Group, the Edgewater Group, the South Side Builders, Lincoln Park. And there was just a lot of heat and a lot of anger by housing providers. Of course, we used to call ourselves this term called landlord, but we're way beyond that, right? But there was a lot of anger about the RLTO, and then there was this tragedy in Lincoln Park where there's a porch collapse, which was such a horrific event. 14 young people passed, but the response by the city was excessive in terms of porch requirements, and we felt like the government did really not understand the realities of management and ownership of multifamily, and we realized we needed to talk with a single voice. And that's how the NBOA was conceived. Phenomenal folks like Mike Choros, Estella Kaiser, Marty Max, Martin Kerpel said, let's go advocate directly on behalf of housing providers. They said landlords. And we don't need any lobbyists, they said.
Sure.
And they were wonderful, and they advocated. There was some reform of the RLTO that they worked with the Chicagoland Apartment Association and the realtors even back then,
Sure.
and directly interacted with aldermen such as Alderman Stone and other mainstays of the city council back then. And that effort was heroic and phenomenal, but short-lived because of burnout. The organization remained in existence for another 14 or so years, doing some important work, but not as engaged and involved as we are now. I took over in 2018. We had a major rent control fight that we
Yes.
had with the CAA. Under their guidance, we opposed that in 2019 and dealt with Cook County Commissioner Brandon Johnson's
Just housing
just
amendment.
housing, which is when I met
Yes.
you,
Yes.
and that was quite a fight. And then we entered into the era of COVID when the NBOA realized we've got to grow up and be a big boy at the table, and we brought on lobbyists and media folk
Yes.
to help us engage in these battles, in this advocacy work. And the folks that we brought on then, Joe Moore, former alderman, and Mick Snyder with PR, Sphere PR, have been with us ever since. And earlier this year, we saw that there was a great need to beef up our lobbying efforts. And there was this amazing free agent on the market who we brought on, and that was you.
Yes.
So it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it definitely has been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And I'm always learning about NBOA, and I just love the different perspectives and how citywide and really regionally that NBOA's reach has really been. And to me, that's very interesting because so many pieces of legislation impact housing providers. And there's oftentimes whenever I'm talking with real estate investors or people who are in commercial real estate, they look at Cook County and say, there's a lot of risk there. I'm going to look at other markets. There's significant risk when you're investing, especially in residential housing within Cook County and Chicago. So NBOA has grown significantly over the years, right? And, I haven't been involved with NBOA nearly as long as some of the other players that help you do your job as president. But I am curious, how did you grow NBOA so much over the years? Is it because of the need to have a seat at the table? Or, what has been the cornerstone as NBOA has grown? Because, you're reaching new levels.
Thanks for that question. Going to Springfield that first year and advocating against lifting the ban on rent control gave me an opportunity to interact directly with legislators at the state level. I think that there are certain state legislators that understand the industry. All state legislators are impacted by their voters that bring them into office, so they're very sensitive to the way that housing impacts tenants, and they're certainly looking to make sure that laws that involve landlord tenants are fair. Yet I also found that folks that are making the laws really did not understand what rent control is. With all due fairness to legislators or even aldermen or the county commissioners, there's a lot there.
Yeah,
It's
right.
not, this is
Right.
not the
It
only
sounds
issue,
like a
right?
good idea. Control the rents, right?
Right.
But there's so much built into why rents are the way they are.
Right.
Yeah.
And so not all legislators or aldermen or commissioners have the time and bandwidth to fully understand the issues.
Right.
So our challenge is educating these folks. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. So as a lobbyist, I feel like most of my job is educational based. It's here's something that somebody wants to regulate. Well, do they know the mechanics? And after they've had a chance to really get into some of the weeds on this matter, would they still make the same decision if they didn't have this information? And most of the time they change their mind.
And one of the great successes that NBOA has had, I believe, we found an important role for lobbyists, Joe Moore for the
Yes.
past number of years, and then you, that you are not the only voice for housing providers that are neighborhood based. What you are doing is actively working with experienced housing providers in the neighborhoods and helping make sure we have our voice, making sure that we are talking directly the actual housing providers. And where the NBOA, you asked earlier, what is the key to our success? We're not representing the big dogs who own the high rises
Sure.
or the big suburban complexes. We truly are in the neighborhoods, and we are throughout the county. And we do represent the voice of the neighborhood landlord. Is that what
Right.
is that what you've seen?
Yes, I have the luxury of owning property, the privilege of owning property, but I'm not a housing provider. I don't provide housing for somebody else. And so oftentimes from a housing provider perspective, it's what is good for the community? How do I keep this building safe? How do I keep it affordable? And I think that's oftentimes what the people and the leaders of NBOA have consistently brought to the table in meetings with elected officials. It's okay, so as an example, we can talk about just cause eviction, but for people who are listening, they may have experience with just cause eviction in another location, say on the coast or wherever it may be. Just cause eviction ultimately increases the cost of housing.
And just cause eviction, for those who might not know exactly, I've loved to insert the term an endless lease.
Right, that's right. So it means that you have to have some sort of a cause to end a lease or to non-renew a lease, right? And if you're not familiar with the process, you're like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Like you should have a reason to not renew a lease. But when you're talking with someone who's been doing this for 30 years and they're trying to consider a community and the impact of a building when maybe somebody just isn't the right fit, they're paying their rent, they're otherwise complying with their lease agreement, but they're just, maybe they smoke weed all the time. Right. And not that that's a big deal, but it disrupts somebody who doesn't smoke weed.
The problem with just cause, and I don't want to get overly focused on one policy idea, it originates from an okay place, an understandable place when a legislator or alderman hears from a tenant who was lived 15 years in an apartment and always paid their rent and maybe undervalued, and suddenly a new owner comes in and wants to renovate and gives notice and says, sorry.
Right.
And that is where this notion of, hey, we have to help these people comes from.
Right.
Yes. But what is it that we do to help clarify what it really means and why it's such a bad idea?
Right. So I think those conversations are important when you're explaining what the importance of having the ability to not renew a lease because you want to renovate a building, because you want to improve it, because that's a long-term impact on the community. You want to maintain that building, and so maybe the tenants are going to be notified that their lease is not going to be renewed because of whatever reason, right?
It's a tool.
It's a tool. Because as a property owner, you own that property. That's a right for you to be able to maintain and for you to make a decision whether or not you want to rent out that space. You should have that right. You should have that right to say, I'm going to renovate this property. I'm not in a position to offer this as a place for somebody else to live. Maybe it's becoming uninhabitable or whatever the case may be. As the owner, you tend to have that right.
Or maybe this particular tenant, as you said, is just simply not a good fit for the building.
Right.
And they're creating some issues.
Right.
And it's our tool and our need as a landlord or housing provider to control our building.
Right.
And we've gotten that word across, and I think, we folks do sort of get that idea.
Right.
So we are now focused on some ordinances.
Yes.
That are designed to address what's perceived to be a problem in affordable housing. What's the latest?
Yes. Well, so earlier this summer, there was a proposal offered by the mayor's office that was Protect Renters Ordinance, or PRO. So included in that proposal was just cause eviction. And part of that, along with just cause eviction, was relocation assistance, where there would be a payment if there was any reason that you were going to non-renew a lease. In some cases, the fees ranged between $3,000 or whatever. It was a lot. It was a very large amount. $3,000, $10,000, whatever was greater, or 10 months rent. These were huge fees. So it was that. It was the establishment of the rental bureau, so an entirely new administrative body that could help tenants who might be undergoing different situations. It really wasn't meant for the landlord, but it would have also established a right to counsel program where tenants would have access to attorneys. It would modify the existing laws on the books,
And
the
it's
residential
still a proposal.
landlord. Yes,
There's a lot of
it is
disturbing.
still very much a proposal that is out there,
And
right?
what has happened in the last week or so?
So within the last week, there's a group of aldermen that really started to form under this administration that came together really last fall during the budget negotiations, and they're sort of like the common sense group. It's this group of people who want to sort of bring ideas that are more reasonable, more realistic with way communities operate. And so they put together a proposal last Wednesday during the city council meeting. They're actually going through the legislative process, which, instead of trying to skirt the legislative process like the PRO, it was it was introduced at city council. That's when new pieces of legislation get introduced. And it was assigned to the zoning committee. And from that, there will be more discussions. So there's a few differences between the two proposals. I will say it's a better proposal in a sense that it doesn't have a lot of the really huge red flags. The PRO was a non-negotiable. Exactly. This is a piece of legislation that, and we even talked, you and I were there when we met with the housing commissioner, and it was just, this is a piece of legislation that we just can't negotiate. Right. There are no tweaks to this legislation.
It's a no-go ordinance.
Yes, it's just a no-go. There are just so many concerns. Just, if you want to just throw this away, we can start new, but there was no interest for that.
So as of now, there's two pro-tenant ordinances that are designed to address some
Right.
tenant problems. And we're looking at this new one to
Yes.
see how it would work for us, right?
So looking at the new one, getting as much feedback as we can. There's a lot to comb through, and some areas are really an improvement, but other areas likely will need some sort of clarification.
Yeah. And underlying all this is an issue that we have with the current administration. And it doesn't just happen with this administration. We saw it happen at the county level when I first met you before. It's that the voice of the neighborhood housing provider is not heard when new legislation is being considered. Time and time again, I've seen the playbook, even at the state level. And what is that
Right.
playbook that our adversaries seem to want to play?
Well, oftentimes, and the lawmaker, especially in the city of Chicago, is looking at, what are the dynamics of the neighborhoods that I represent? And sometimes there's more renters than there are owners. That's just,
Oh, it's-
the way it is. In some communities, you get 75% renters, 25% owners.
Gotcha.
Right? So a lot of times it's, there are smaller numbers. Sometimes the tenant groups can be very organized in a grassroots way. They show up at meetings that, they have a coordinated approach, and, that's great for them. But lawmakers need to hear both perspectives. To make good policy, you need to understand all of the dynamics. And when it comes to the housing provider, especially at the smaller level, you need to know what it takes to operate a building. What does it mean to what does rent control actually mean? What community has worked well with rent control?
Right.
Is New York better because of the rent control laws?
Right,
And
right.
that we don't need to go down that path of rent control in New York, because you have a ton of information and
Sure.
insight on New York. But you want policies that are going to work. And in the city, when you have these smaller buildings and the smaller owner operators, if they walk away from those buildings because they become so difficult to manage, you're going to have larger corporations and the larger investors that are coming from different parts of the world, right? Real estate is a global business, right? But you have investors who are coming from anywhere, and depending on their portfolio goals, they're going to want to buy some properties. And
Just tell me the myth that we deal with, the reality of affordable housing and naturally occurring affordable housing. Who's providing the bulk of the housing in Chicago or Cook County?
That's a good question. I don't know statistically, but I know that there are some really good numbers from the DePaul housing studies that, they say that the NOAA, naturally occurring affordable housing, it's like 70%.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, okay, good. I didn't make up that
And
statistic.
that's our messaging.
Yeah.
I want to make sure elected officials here, we don't get a lot of media or recognition, but the owner of most of these buildings are folks that are putting sweat equity in. They might have a regular W-2 job.
Right.
They're trying to pursue intergenerational wealth.
Yes.
They're trying to aspire to having an investment property in their portfolio,
Yes.
and they work like crazy to own that 2-flat or the
Yes.
8-flat. And these are folks that are construction oriented. They're learning the basics of leasing. They're learning how to deal with the criminal element that they have to
Well, and
prevent.
screening. It's just screening a tenant
Yeah.
right off of the bat. I have heard a lot about fraud
Mhm.
in the screening process. I mean, and if you're new to the business side of operating a building, you're at significant risk of being scammed.
And the point
Yeah.
is not all housing providers or landlords are mega large companies, whether they're national corporate entities or locally equipped companies with tons of staff and resources
Right.
that can handle very complex ordinances
Right.
that come out there.
Right.
Most are small folks that if they face on a six flat, one or two tenants that don't pay rent.
They could lose that building.
Yeah, they could lose the building.
They could easily lose that building, especially if you haven't set up enough reserves. If you're, if you say you do have a tenant that has committed some sort of fraud, maybe in their application,
Right.
and then they stop paying rent after a couple of months, and you haven't built up a reserve because maybe you just spent, a partial or most of your life savings to buy a building to live out a dream. And then, you are in a position of, well, I have to pay my mortgage. I
Right.
have to pay the taxes. Otherwise they're coming after me, right? Like that's your sweat equity, like
Right.
you're getting the phone calls about the plumbing on, Saturday morning when you thought you were going to go for a run. You're getting a call about, some sort of issue that happened in the neighborhood and it might affect the building at any moment. And you're just learning on the fly.
I was
Yeah.
an example of that in a different way last week. I got a 5 a.m. text that a rat entered one of my tenants' apartments.
Yeah.
That's tough stuff.
Right.
And I think that's when you asked me earlier, what's the key to our success? Is that I think we found a group of owners that need our representation.
Sure.
And that's what we're doing.
Yeah, I think the educational piece is critical. So going back to the just cause eviction, years ago, this is not a new concept in the city. It's not a new idea, but that education has happened for a long period of time. And some of the people who NBOA has met with over the years, they're a part of this common sense group. And so they've heard from NBOA. They've heard from different groups about this is going to be the impact if you enact this type of policy. This is going to be harmful to the local housing provider in your community, and this is how much they're going to raise rent. Because it always comes back to the more regulations, the more cost, and it's going to come back to hurt the tenants in the long
So
run.
let's talk about two more things here. The gist behind this, either of these ordinances are to make rents more affordable.
That's the goal, or that's the idea. That's like this idea.
Or has the city, or even the Common Sense Caucus aldermen, are they really zeroing in on solutions that will make rents more affordable in the city or county?
I think we need to identify and we need to have a clear problem that is coming from our lawmakers. What's the problem here? And in our conversations, there have been some problems that have been identified.
Mm-hmm.
One is not being able to identify an owner of a building. That's
What
a
would
clear
be that
problem.
scenario where that's
Yes.
important?
So communities, we talked with the Southside Alderman about some properties in his
Our
ward.
friend David Moore.
Yes, David Moore, just
Englewood.
great guy, yeah.
Yeah.
And so we're talking with him, and he's had some buildings where just people have had issues. Say there's a rat, say there's, something that they need to report, to have somebody take care of. And as a renter, you should have that ability to have someone, you're paying rent, you've entered into this agreement. You have expectations, and that's a good thing. As a renter, you have expectations of your landlord, of the property owner, of the housing provider, whoever it is that you're working with. In David Moore's scenario, in Alderman David Moore's situation, there was no clear owner for those tenants to get in touch with.
Right.
That's a problem. So to me, it's like, okay, well, there's a simple solution, and we're seeing that in some of the legislation. But then in addition to having some sort of an identification mechanism, there are all these other things, right? And Chicago's existing law was passed 40 years ago, and there is some merit to taking a look at that. But
Because
is that
it's
what we're
frustrating
doing? Right.
if some entity owns the building and they're hiding, the appearances they're hiding behind
Right.
LLCs.
Right.
There should be
And
a
there are
path.
reasons why people create an LLC.
Sure.
And it's justifiable. But there should be someone at least locally for a tenant to
To
reach.
take
To
responsibility
take
for the
response,
building.
yeah, there should be an alderperson, an elected official should be able to know who owns, who's responsible for the safety of this building.
But let's
That's
go
pretty
back to this
basic.
affordability thing. Do these ordinances address affordability?
The pro ordinance absolutely does not for several reasons, right? It increases risk because of the potential liability of making a mistake if you're handling a move-in fee, move-out fee, whatever that is. If you're now, if there's a desire to change to a security deposit, there is a cap on that to 1 month's rent. That means you've got to maybe factor in the actual costs of, what does it, what is the turnover for a building? And does 1 month's rent really cover it? And if it doesn't, you're going to say, well, I'm going to have to increase the rent by 2 or 3% because you're just going to build those costs in, right? Or at least most housing providers would. You just have to say, all right, what are my costs? Am I in the hole every year? How can I run this building? Because that's your responsibility. You need to be a good steward of that building, right? So that increases costs. When you add any sort of risk, it increases costs significantly. The just cause eviction piece blows costs and affordability out of the water, even though people are already suffering and they're really concerned, how am I going to pay their rent? And so the Protect Renters Ordinance by the mayor, as introduced, would be extremely harmful.
Yeah.
And it would put a lot of property owners out of business. And
But-
people
but
would
the
just say, I don't
misconception-
want to do this business anymore. I can't.
Right.
It's too risky. It's too hard. And I can't afford it. And I can't operate this building anymore.
So oftentimes NBOA is playing defense. Bad legislation sprung up last week. We have 2 days' notice. We're trying to protect the industry to make sure that we as housing providers can remain competitive. Yet I see a growing recognition and an ability of the NBOA and our colleagues are so important.
For sure.
The realtors, the CAA, we work together. There's a broader position for us to take to really deal with the affordability problem.
Absolutely.
And what is that? That solution is predicated on a market force called supply and demand, right?
Yeah. It's what it comes down to. I mean, the amount of times that NBOA discusses supply and demand is just natural to any conversation. And, this is not necessarily a conversation for us to get into all of the ways that we could fix supply and demand, but there are a lot of solutions, right? ARO, the Affordable Requirements Ordinance, that has had significant impact on the ability to build, whether it's a 4-flat or a larger
And
200
that's a
building.
city requirement that
yeah.
it used to be 10% of all new construction that required governmental approval or zoning changes. 10% be affordable. Now it's 20%. And what
Right.
were you saying about that?
Let's look at this just like more broadly speaking. So a lot of communities have what's called the inclusionary zoning. That's not a problem in itself. You want affordable housing. We need affordable housing. We desperately need affordable housing. But when you don't have the supply side of the market rate to subsidize the affordable, then you get nothing. Mm-hmm. And so what we haven't done is a comprehensive review of housing policies that, dare I say, might have failed, right? So what housing policies have been successful? What have not achieved the intended goal? And I would argue that the ARO has failed to deliver the housing supply that we desperately need.
Certainly in the outlying neighborhoods.
Affordable housing, market rate housing, all of the housing types. Maybe you could make an argument, although I haven't done the research, that the ARO has produced luxury housing. So it has resulted in a market for more luxury housing, which has created a discrepancy between the amount of affordable housing that we need and market rate.
NBOA to help really bring a discussion and a vision of how to cure a housing shortage where some experts contend that we're 130,000 units shy.
Yeah, and I hear that number keeps going up. Like, I mean, it's just,
We have to look at the offense. How do we cure this problem? How do we add, and in fact, living in a city that has a beautiful south and west side,
yes, I know exactly where you're going and I love it.
go for it. What am I saying? You can say it better than me. Go.
I don't know if I could say it better than you, but
Yeah.
I love the direction that you're heading because Chicago doesn't have a problem that other communities have where there's land. There are opportunities throughout this city where there are vacant properties. There are communities that are longing for investment, but there can be some changes, whether it's working with the land bank or working with the community to say, let's bring you some more amenities, let's make this more attractive. But there are some dynamics that hold people back, that hold investors back. And some of those dynamics, the city does need to get control over crime.
Yeah.
That's an issue. But that's like, that will come. Whenever I moved to the city of Chicago, I was like, where can I afford? And if it's risky, I'll, be aware. But there are bigger issues, right? There are much bigger issues than, a community with crime. There are communities that have been historically disinvested in for many, many years, whether it's the infrastructure or years of neglect by the city. And there are so many opportunities to bring those communities on an equal level playing field to the north side, to Lincoln Park. I mean, there are so many communities that are within a small radius of downtown Chicago that are just ripe for investment. And I mean, they're so close to the central district that I'm just like, wow. I mean, it's stunning the amount of opportunities for the city of Chicago, and just the right amount of reduction of risk for investors, the right amount of getting some more businesses and some communities so there's a little bit more amenities for people to want to live, work, and play. There's transportation already in many of these communities, so you just need a little bit more of a incentive. And I think the opportunities are endless, and that's exciting to me. And it doesn't necessarily have to be affordable housing. It could be market rate housing that drives the rents down because the supply has improved, right? That's very simple.
It's simple. It's also a maze and a mystery when, you go through the conventional route of building affordable housing in some of the more troubled neighborhoods. So the best practice has been to rely on tax credits, and the mechanics of those deals ultimately we end up with a limited number of new housing units that can use tax credits and build new units at $700,000 or $800,000 a door. It's not going to do it.
Yeah, light tech is not. It's not for everyone.
No. So the challenge, and we're having an event July 31st, because this podcast will be available, where we're going to be touring the Englewood community in the 16th Ward. And we don't have all the answers of how to make housing opportunities, but we're going to sure bring some private market investors and developers and builders, and let's take a look at what's happening along Halsted Street, and let's go down to these other neighborhoods.
And to NBO's credit, me coming into this and trying to help plan this, the message that I've been told time and time again, which is like, we're not going there to tell them what to do. We're going there to listen.
Yeah.
And that's really important because, a lot of communities need to be built up by the people who live there now. It's just what type of assistance is needed to give people what they are looking for in a reasonable way where the laws are not prohibiting investors from coming in. The laws are prohibiting investors from coming in.
So it's relationships, it's trust, and it's a willingness that I'm seeking from the stakeholders in these neighborhoods to invite us in, hear some amazing ideas from a very skilled set of real estate professionals who are looking for opportunities.
Yes.
And let's create opportunities in these neighborhoods. So winding things up here, let's talk about something fun.
All right.
Do you know of any fun events that are coming up that have the NBOA's name on it?
I've had this on my calendar for a
Okay.
long time
Yeah.
because I missed it last year because I
Oh.
couldn't go.
Okay.
And I was extremely disappointed because every year that I've gone, I've had fun.
Yeah.
I'm actually bringing one of my friends,
Good.
just because I think she'll have fun and she
Good.
needs to have fun.
Good.
But NBOA is having their soiree on
Oh.
August 6th. Yes, so it's a Thursday. I've had it on my calendar not only because it's fun, but also because it's a good time to connect with a lot of of just housing providers and people who are in the industry and are looking to hear updates about what's going on and to appreciate you, Mike.
Yeah.
I mean, you've done a lot of work to make NBOA successful. You've done a lot to do the fundraising. You made so many calls. You're not begging for support, which I appreciate. You're saying, no, if this is important to you, then show up and put your
Yeah.
money where your mouth is.
We'll have a lot of elected officials there. But what I find most exciting about this event is that the broad array of housing providers, property managers, developers that show up that are represent and reflect the entire canvas of Chicago and Cook County, that we have, we really showcase all the folks that are looking to invest in Chicago, and they're there at this event. If you're listening to this podcast and it's before July 25th, by the way, there is a chance to purchase tickets at the early bird pricing.
Nice.
So if you hear this and it's July 25th or earlier, buy your ticket, you can save $50. But the tickets will remain available. Just don't wait till the last second because we can't guarantee there will be tickets available. But it should be a lot of fun, and we appreciate so many sponsors that
Yep.
realize that if they're one of a number, 100 or so sponsors, they might not get all the kudos and focus, but that's okay. These sponsors see what we do and want to support us, right?
Right. One day I do have a dream of being a housing provider, but I want to do this lead up to it. But I do really appreciate what NBOA does, and it's a source of people to go for information, and so it's great what you've done, Mike. So
And
thank you.
now it's early afternoon, maybe
Yeah.
we could get that beer and
Yeah.
and-
Yeah.
Okay.